Antarctica was never empty. It only looked that way. When humans first saw it from the ocean's edge, they believed they had found the end of the world, a white, silent boundary beyond which there was nothing but cold and death. But that was a mistake of perception, the same kind of mistake as calling the night sky empty simply because the human eye can't see the motion of stars. True emptiness makes no sound, and Antarctica has always sounded like something. Even now, while satellites slide over its surface and sensors measure every millimeter of ice, something beneath that frozen continent keeps a rhythm. Not noise, not chaos. Rhythm. Slow, persistent. The kind of pattern you cannot hear with ears, but instruments can. And sometimes people can feel it. What if the most isolated continent on Earth isn't isolated at all? What if it isn't an edge but a center? Imagine a place where the geometry of reality behaves differently, where compasses lose meaning, and time seems less certain about which direction it's supposed to flow. Where ice is not merely frozen water, but a membrane, an ancient barrier separating one state of the world from another. If Earth hides a crossing point, a threshold between layers of existence, it would never rest in warm, inhabited lands where everything is constantly changing. It would be buried where change slows down, under miles of ice, in a silence that lasts for centuries. Antarctica does not sleep. It holds. Beneath its surface are mountain ranges higher than the Alps and valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon. More than 400 subglacial lakes, some remaining liquid in defiance of the most basic expectations of thermodynamics. Water sealed in darkness for millions of years still carries warmth, as if something below is feeding it from within. And when researchers mapped those lakes, they noticed something they couldn't easily dismiss. They were not scattered at random. They formed structure. A spiral. A slow, deliberate curve revolving around a single point in East Antarctica, where Earth's magnetic field behaves as if it's being bent by something far heavier than stone. The wasteland anomaly was long treated as a geological oddity, the scar of an ancient meteor strike. A simple explanation, a comfortable explanation, but the data never fully matched. The shape was too clean, the layers too concentric, the signal too stable. And then there was the pulse. Every 11 minutes, the anomaly shifts. Not with solar storms, not with seasonal variation, not as noise, as rhythm, like a heartbeat. Weak, yes, almost buried inside the planet's own magnetic roar, but constant, unbroken, as if it has been breathing in the dark long before humans learned to name the poles. What generates a pulsing magnetic pattern beneath 2 miles of ice? Modern science, cautious by design, offers restrained language. But ancient cultures were never that shy. They spoke of gates. What's unsettling isn't that myths exist. It's that they agree. Norse traditions describe a primal void between fire and ice, a boundary zone where reality itself first took shape. Tibetan texts speak of hidden realms that do not sit far away, but sideways, intersecting our world, and reachable unless you approach the axis of the world. Indigenous stories tell of emergence points, openings where worlds change into worlds. And again, those openings appear at the extremes, at the edges, at the poles, where the sun behaves strangely, where compasses lose their minds. That could be dismissed as symbolism if not for one detail. These cultures were separated by oceans and millennia. They did not share maps. They did not share language. They did not share contact. And yet they carved the same shapes. Circles, spirals, central points, world axes. Not maps of places, but diagrams of crossings. Not geography mechanics. Could myth be memory? Not fiction, but inheritance, an old fact translated into story because the raw truth could not survive intact? In the 20th century, humanity decided to test Antarctica. Not out of romance, out of necessity. The world entered an age where knowledge became weaponry, and a continent could no longer remain blank. Expeditions returned different. Not screaming. Not raving, not openly terrified, just quiet. They spoke of valleys without ice, of warmth, of instruments failing, of a presence not threatening, not attacking, simply aware. And then something even stranger happened. In 1959, at the height of the Cold War, 12 rival nations did the impossible. They agreed rapidly, quietly, with almost no public explanation. Antarctica was sealed, officially, for peace and science. Unofficially, to keep distance. Why would a divided world incapable of agreement on nearly anything suddenly unite to keep an entire continent neutral, untouched, protected? Because sometimes knowledge isn't something you chase. Sometimes it's something you step back from. Decades passed. The ice held. But the planet changed. The climate shifted. Glaciers began to retreat. And with each decade, sensors detected more anomalies. Heat where there should be none. Light with no source. Signals that behaved less like nature and more like intention. Some subglacial lakes began to glow. Not bright. Not like flame. Like bioluminescence, cold, steady radiance, as if the water remembered a different spectrum of light. And then came the dome. A plasma formation over East Antarctica captured by satellites and mirrored by instruments across the southern hemisphere. It did not drift like aurora. It did not scatter like weather. It held a perfect curvature, as if contained by an invisible boundary. And it pulsed in the same 11-minute rhythm. When physicists overlaid its parameters onto theoretical models, the match became uncomfortable. Curvature, energy density, geometry. Too close to what mathematics predicted for transitional structures in spacetime passage-like phenomena forms that should not exist naturally on Earth. Not proof, but enough to make people go silent. After that, data disappeared. Couriers changed direction. Reports were reclassified or softened into harmless phrases. Expeditions were redirected. Certain regions of Antarctica gained new restrictions never fully explained. But the process did not stop. The ice kept thinning. The signal grew stronger. In fractures, long-exposure imaging captured faint light rising from below, not reflecting from above. Seismic arrays recorded low-frequency vibrations that, when translated into audible range, did not resemble random groaning ice. They resembled pattern. Lake Enigma became the focus. Warmer than it should be. More active. More carefully avoided. Teams working nearby reported dreams. An unnatural sense of observation not from the surface, but from beneath. And when an automated probe went silent after sending its last images of geometry under the ice, the question stopped being hypothetical. Something is down there. Not ruins. Not a camp. Not a city. A structure. A mechanism. A threshold. Perhaps it was never built by anyone. Perhaps it formed as a consequence of planetary geometry and not in reality where lines converge. A natural hinge. Or perhaps it was constructed. Not for us. And not against us. What if Antarctica is not a door, but a mirror? Not an entrance, but an overlap? What if the figures cameras sometimes hint at are not invaders, but guardian states of being rather than bodies, entities for whom time is not a straight line, but a circle? If that is true, then the real question is not what lies on the other side. The real question is whether we are ready to learn that this side is only one layer among many. Myths do not always warn of invasion. Sometimes they warn of meeting. And when the ice finally retreats, what opens will not be a secret. It will be a choice. Not apocalypse, but recognition. Because some of the oldest gates in the world do not open outward. They open inward. And maybe Antarctica was never the last mystery of Earth. Maybe it was the first. The first mistake humanity made about Antarctica was believing it was discovered. It wasn't. It was revealed briefly, reluctantly, like something that allows itself to be seen only when conditions are right. And when those conditions change, it withdraws again, not out of fear, but patience. Antarctica does not behave like land. It behaves like a boundary. Everything about it resists permanence. Ice flows like stone slowed to near stillness. Mountains rise and vanish beneath frozen sheets. Lakes exist without sunlight. Rivers move uphill beneath pressure. Even time feels altered there, stretched thin, hesitant, as if unsure whether it is supposed to move forward at all. This is not how continents act. This is how interfaces behave. Beneath the ice lies a geography that should not exist as it does. Radar surveys reveal valleys carved with impossible precision. Subglacial rivers follow paths too symmetrical to be random. Entire basins remain warm despite the absence of volcanic activity. Heat appears where there should be none, persists without fuel, and organizes itself into patterns. Patterns are the key. Nature produces chaos first, structure second. Antarctica reverses this order. The deeper we look, the more orderly it becomes. Circles, spirals, radial symmetry, layered geometry repeating at multiple scales, as if the same blueprint is being expressed through different materials: rock, water, magnetism, plasma. At the center of this organization lies the wasteland region, where Earth's magnetic field bends inward like a compass needle trying to point at something beneath the crust. For decades, the explanation was simple. Impact crater. A meteor struck hundreds of millions of years ago. End of story. But impacts leave scars that fade with depth. This does not. The deeper the scans penetrate, the stronger the signal becomes. It is not a wound. It is an implant. And it pulses. Every 11 minutes. This rhythm does not drift. It does not decay. It does not synchronize with solar activity or lunar cycles. It exists independently, as if time itself is merely passing through it rather than governing it. When researchers first noticed the pulse, they assumed instrument error, noise, coincidence. But the signal appeared across multiple datasets, recorded by different instruments, separated by vast distances. The same 11-minute interval echoed through magnetometers in New Zealand, South Africa, and Chile. That is when comparisons began. Astrophysicists noticed something unsettling. Certain cosmic phenomena, magnetars, distant quasars, even black hole mergers emit radiation in repeating intervals. Some of those intervals align disturbingly well with 11 minutes. Not exactly, but close enough to raise a question no one wanted to ask. What if the Antarctic anomaly is not generating a signal but responding to one? That possibility reframes everything, because if Antarctica is acting as a receiver, then the structure beneath it is not passive geology. It is functional, tuned, waiting. Ancient cultures may have understood this long before modern science stumbled toward it. Across civilizations that never met, never exchanged knowledge, never shared language, the same idea appears again and again. The world has an axis, a point of stillness, a place where layers meet. In Norse cosmology, the roots of Yggdrasil descend into frozen realms where time behaves differently. In Tibetan esoteric texts, Shambhala is not described as distant, but hidden, accessible through alignment, not travel. Hopi traditions speak of emergence points where humanity passed between worlds. Inuit stories describe passages beneath ice where spirits move between states of being. These are not stories of fantasy worlds. They are stories of thresholds. And thresholds are never meant to be crossed casually. What modern science is rediscovering through data, ancient humanity encoded through myth. Not because they were primitive, but because myth is the only medium capable of preserving forbidden knowledge across millennia. Direct truth erodes. Symbol survives. Which brings us to the 20th century, when humanity unknowingly approached the threshold again. Antarctica remained largely untouched until technology made it unavoidable. Aircraft, satellites, submarines. Suddenly, the last quiet place on Earth was no longer unreachable. And something changed. Expeditions did not fail catastrophically. They failed subtly. Instruments malfunctioned. Navigation drifted. Time records conflicted. Crews reported disorientation without cause. Not fear, confusion. They described valleys warmer than they should be. Light beneath ice. Sounds with no source. Not loud enough to alarm, but persistent enough to be noticed. Then came the expeditions no one talks about openly. The German mission of 19,381,939 officially surveyed territory. Unofficially, it carried geophysicists, magnetic specialists, and maps that predated Antarctica's accepted discovery. Maps showing ice-free interiors, valleys, rivers. Those maps should not have existed. The reports that followed were sealed. 8 years later, Operation High Jump was launched, the largest Antarctic expedition in history. 13 ships, aircraft carriers, submarines, thousands of personnel. Officially, training and logistics testing. Unofficially, verification. The mission was scheduled for 8 months. It ended after 8 weeks. Weather was blamed. Equipment failure. But weather does not force aircraft carriers to retreat. Weather does not silence entire crews. Weather does not cause admirals to stop speaking. And yet Admiral Richard Byrd never publicly explained why the operation ended early. Privately, his notes suggest something else. Accounts contested, disputed, dismissed describe magnetic disruption so severe that instruments failed completely. Flights diverted into regions not on any map. Valleys where ice gave way to exposed rock and warmth. A sense of being guided, not attacked. What matters is not whether every detail is true. What matters is what happened next. In 1959, 12 nations, some of them bitter enemies, signed a treaty unlike any other in history. Antarctica would be neutral. No military activity. No resource extraction. No permanent settlement beyond research. No ownership. A continent removed from human ambition. Why? Because something was encountered that could not be unencountered. And for decades, that decision held. Until the ice began to melt. Climate change explains part of it. Rising temperatures, shifting currents, atmospheric feedback loops, all real, all measurable. But they do not explain everything. Thermal imaging reveals heat blooming from beneath the interior. Not along fault lines. Not near volcanoes. In patterns. Expanding outward from the Wilkes Land spiral. Subglacial lakes grow warmer together, as if responding to a shared source. And then came the light. Not reflected sunlight. Not aurora. Not fire. A soft, cold glow, visible only through long exposure or specialized sensors. Bioluminescent in character, but not biological in origin. It does not flicker. It breathes. In March 2019, satellites recorded something unprecedented. A plasma dome formed above East Antarctica. Not moving. Not dispersing. Maintaining perfect curvature. Plasma does not behave this way. Yet this structure persisted for hours, pulsing in harmonic intervals 11, 22, 33 minutes. Mathematical harmonics. When physicists modeled the dome's geometry, they found something deeply unsettling. Its curvature matched theoretical predictions for a stabilized space-time distortion. A passage. A tunnel. A boundary interface. Energy was not radiating outward. It was being drawn inward. As if Antarctica were acting as a sink, a focal point where planetary and cosmic energies converged. Background radiation levels dropped measurably across the southern hemisphere during the event, as if energy normally present throughout space was being redirected into a single location, into the ice. Seismic sensors deep beneath the continent recorded vibrations synchronized with the plasma pulse. Not earthquakes, not ice movement, a rhythm, the same rhythm. After 3 hours, the dome collapsed. The sky returned to normal. Official explanations cited solar interaction and geomagnetic disturbance. But data was removed. Researchers reassigned. Raw measurements classified. And yet the pulse did not stop. Lake Enigma, one of the warmest subglacial lakes, became the focus of quiet concern. Equipment near it malfunctioned. Crews reported auditory hallucinations. Low-frequency sounds translated into audio revealed structured modulation too complex to be random. When analysis was applied, originally designed to decode whale songs and pulsar signals, it detected repeating phoneme-like patterns. Not language. Pre-language. A signal structured like intent. The word some believed they heard was not important. The repetition was. And when an automated probe descended through the ice and transmitted its final images, everything changed. The camera did not show rock. It showed space. A cavern, vast, smooth, symmetrical. Pillars of translucent material glowing from within. Concentric platforms arranged with impossible precision. Geometry that did not erode, did not fracture, did not behave like anything shaped by pressure or time. And figures. Not clearly solid. Not clearly separate from the environment. Tall, human-like in proportion, but indistinct-like shapes half-phased between states. One turned toward the camera. The sensation reported by those who saw the footage was not fear. It was recognition, as if something ancient had noticed it was being noticed. Then the signal cut. The probe ceased transmission. The borehole sealed not with ice, but with a glass-like substance resistant to heat and cutting tools. Within days, the data was erased from public databases. Within weeks, interior Antarctic stations began receiving evacuation orders. Official reasons varied. Environmental risk, budgetary restructuring, safety protocols. But the coordination was global. Antarctica was being cleared, not because of what might come out, but because of what might fully open. Magnetic field measurements show Earth's protective shield weakening not evenly, but directionally, as if something beneath Antarctica is drawing energy from the field itself. Physicists fear that maintaining a stable threshold between realities may require planetary scale power. The gate does not create energy, it consumes it. And as the ice thins, resistance decreases. What happens when the barrier becomes too thin to hold? No one knows. Perhaps the gate does not lead elsewhere. Perhaps it leads here from a folded layer of reality that has always existed alongside ours. Perhaps the beings observed are not invaders. Perhaps they are custodians, or reflections, or something older than the idea of worlds altogether. Ancient myths did not warn of conquest. They warned of balance. They did not say the gate would open violently. They said it would open when the time was right. And time, like Antarctica itself, is not linear. The pulse continues. The light beneath the ice grows brighter. The spiral expands. Antarctica does not rush. It waits. Because thresholds are patient. And once crossed, they are never crossed alone. The evacuation of Antarctica did not feel like a retreat. It felt like a closing gesture. Flights were redirected without announcement. Interior stations were emptied quietly, methodically, as if following a protocol written long ago, and simply waiting for the right moment to be activated. Equipment was left behind. Experiments were halted mid-process. Years of research were abandoned without explanation. What remained was silence. But it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of something holding its breath. Satellites continued to pass overhead, though their imaging parameters changed. Certain regions were no longer shown in real time. Coordinates were softened, blurred, replaced with archival data. The official justification was security, environmental protection, political sensitivity. Yet instruments do not respect secrecy. Magnetometers around the world began registering subtle but persistent changes. Earth's magnetic field, long understood as a protective shell, showed signs of directional weakening. Not a global collapse, not a sudden inversion, a gradient, as if something beneath Antarctica was drawing on it. The 11-minute pulse grew stronger, not louder, clearer. Its amplitude increased, not in a linear way, but in steps, plateaus. Periods of stabilization followed by sudden escalation, like a system testing limits, measuring tolerance. Learning, physicists noticed that the pulse now carried harmonics, secondary frequencies branching outward, interacting with the background field. This was no longer a simple oscillation. It was modulation. Something was being encoded. At the same time, anomalies appeared far from Antarctica. Instruments aboard satellites detected irregularities in particle flow around Earth. Cosmic rays normally arriving in a steady drizzle from deep space showed momentary decreases, as if diverted elsewhere. For a brief window, it appeared that Antarctica was acting as a sink, not emitting energy, absorbing it. The implication was terrifying. If a structure beneath the ice was capable of drawing energy not only from Earth's magnetic field, but from the surrounding cosmic environment, then it was not dormant. It was preparing. Geological data added another layer of unease. Seismic sensors recorded vibrations beneath the ice that did not match tectonic movement. They were rhythmic, vertical, as if pressure was building and releasing in cycles. The ice above Lake Enigma cracked along lines too straight to be natural. Fractures formed geometric patterns, arcs, and radial spokes mirroring the spiral map beneath the surface. Thermal imaging showed heat rising along these fractures, faint but undeniable. The ice was thinning from below. And then there were the dreams. Personnel who had worked in the interior, even those evacuated months earlier, reported vivid, recurring dreams. Not nightmares. Not fear-driven hallucinations. Dreams of vast spaces. Of light without source. Of standing at the edge of something immense and feeling neither threatened nor welcome, but acknowledged. Some described hearing a low tone not audible in waking life, but felt. A vibration that seemed to move through the body rather than the air. Always rhythmic. Always familiar. Always the same interval. 11 minutes. Psychologists dismiss these accounts as stress responses. Polar environments are known to affect the mind. Isolation. Extreme cold. Sensory deprivation. But these dreams did not fade with time. They synchronized. People who had never met described the same imagery. The same sensation of orientation being lost and regained. The same feeling that time was not moving forward, but folding, as if consciousness itself had brushed against a boundary. Meanwhile, data continued to accumulate quietly. A group of independent researchers noticed something else. When the Antarctic pulse intensified, small anomalies appeared in the South Atlantic Magnetic Anomaly, a known weak spot in Earth's magnetic field. Satellites passing through the region experienced increased radiation exposure. Instruments glitched. Systems rebooted unexpectedly. The anomaly was expanding, slowly, Directional models suggested that magnetic flux was being drawn southward, toward Antarctica, not collapsing redirected. This behavior did not align with any known geodynamo process. The planet's core does not behave this way, unless something is coupling with it. Some physicists proposed an idea too dangerous to publish openly, that the structure beneath Antarctica might be using Earth itself as a stabilizing mechanism, that the magnetic field normally shielding the planet was being repurposed as a component, a brace, a power source, a lock. In this interpretation, the so-called gate was not opening outward, it was anchoring inward, and maintaining that anchor required energy on a planetary scale. The ice, in this model, was not merely a covering, it was insulation, a buffer, a regulator. As long as the ice remained thick, the system stayed within limits. But as the ice thinned due to climate change or internal heating, those limits weakened. The barrier grew permeable, and permeability invites exchange. Ancient myths warned of this moment, not in technical language. In story, they spoke of times when the worlds drew too close, when boundaries softened, when the old ones stirred, not as invaders, but as inevitabilities. They did not describe catastrophe, they described imbalance. The Norse spoke of Fimbulwinter, not merely endless cold, but a prelude, a thinning, a loss of distinction between states. Fire and ice no longer separated cleanly, the world tree trembling at its roots. Tibetan texts describe cycles where hidden realms draw near as human awareness shifts, periods when the veil grows thin and what was once inaccessible becomes perceptible. Indigenous traditions spoke of times when emergence points reopen, not to release something new, but to allow return. Always return. This theme repeats too often to ignore. And now, modern instruments were observing something eerily similar. In late observations, satellite imagery revealed faint geometric discolorations in the ice circles, barely visible to the naked eye, but unmistakable in spectral analysis. These circles expanded slowly, concentrically, centered on the Wilkesland region. Within these zones, GPS accuracy degraded. Time-stamped signals arrived out of order. Atomic clocks showed discrepancies too small to alarm the public, but too consistent to dismiss. Time itself appeared strained, as if local spacetime was no longer behaving uniformly. The most troubling data came from deep space observatories. During periods of heightened Antarctic activity, distant cosmic signals, gamma-ray bursts, gravitational wave detections showed minute phase shifts upon arrival at Earth. Not delays, alterations, as if the space surrounding Earth was being subtly reconfigured. Some cosmologists suggested that Antarctica might be functioning as a node, not a doorway to a single location, but a junction, a point where different layers of reality intersect, overlap, and exchange information. In this view, the gate is not a door, it is a lens, a focusing structure, and when it activates, it aligns Earth with something else, something ancient, something patient. The final confirmation, though never officially acknowledged, came from a deep-bore automated platform deployed before evacuations were complete. Its mission was simple: measure pressure and temperature gradients beneath one of the newly formed fracture zones. The probe descended normally at first. Ice density, temperature, pressure, all within expected ranges. Then, abruptly, gravity readings shifted. Not dramatically, just enough to register. The probe experienced a downward acceleration inconsistent with mass alone, as if space beneath it was deeper than it should be. The temperature spiked, not heat, but energy density. Electromagnetic sensors overloaded. And then the feed ended. The last data packet contained no images, only numbers. Values exceeding theoretical limits. Negative readings where none should exist. Timestamps repeating themselves. And one final anomaly, a resonance, matching the 11-minute pulse. After that, the system went silent. No recovery was attempted. No explanation was given. The Antarctic interior was declared permanently restricted. What happens next is uncertain. Some believe the system beneath the ice is stabilizing, settling into a new equilibrium. Others fear the opposite, that the pulses are accelerating, intervals shortening, energy intake increasing. If the pattern continues, the barrier will not fail suddenly. It will dissolve gradually, and when it does, the change may not be violent. It may be subtle, a shift in perception, a redefinition of what here means. Because if Antarctica is a threshold, then it is not something that opens once. It opens continuously. slowly, patiently, and perhaps it has been open all along, just narrow enough that only echoes could pass through. Until now, the ice continues to thin. The pulse continues. And the silence that once defined the southernmost continent is no longer empty. It is attentive, waiting. As the interior of Antarctica fell silent, the world above it did not. The absence of human presence did not halt observation. It only changed its nature. Where once there were researchers and drills, now there were distant instruments. Where voices had spoken over radios, now only automated systems listened. And what they recorded suggested that whatever lay beneath the ice was no longer merely responding. It was adapting. The 11-minute pulse did not remain static. Over months, analysts noticed micro-variations, fractions of a second shaved from the interval, then restored, then altered again. Not random drift. Adjustment. As if the system were calibrating itself against resistance it had not felt in a very long time. Energy intake increased, but not uniformly. It came in waves. Periods of heightened absorption followed by lulls that felt almost contemplative. During these lulls, secondary effects appeared elsewhere on the planet. Subtle disruptions in animal migration patterns. Birds deviating from routes followed for generations. Marine mammals altering their communication frequencies, as if compensating for an interference they could not see. Even insects, creatures exquisitely sensitive to magnetic fields, showed momentary disorientation in the southern hemisphere. Life was reacting, not in panic, in adjustment. At high latitudes, auroras appeared where they never had before, faint curtains of green and violet light shimmering over regions far from the poles. Official explanations pointed to solar activity, but the timing did not align. These displays coincided precisely with peak pulses beneath Antarctica. The planet was behaving like a coupled system. What happened in the south no longer stayed in the south. Meanwhile, the psychological effects continued to spread, though few spoke of them openly. Reports surfaced quietly: scientists, pilots, satellite technicians experiencing a recurring sensation during periods of strong Antarctic activity. A momentary loss of orientation. A feeling of standing near something vast and quiet. Not dread. Perspective. As if the mind briefly stepped outside its usual frame of reference. Neurologists studying brainwave patterns during sleep noticed a curious trend. During nights when the Antarctic pulse intensified, data from unrelated sleep studies showed slight but consistent increases in low-frequency synchronization across subjects. Different cities, different countries, no shared environment, yet the same rhythm appeared. The human brain, it seemed, was not immune. Some researchers proposed a radical idea, that consciousness itself might be sensitive to whatever field was being modulated beneath Antarctica. Not in a mystical sense, but as a consequence of physics. The brain is an electromagnetic system. It operates through oscillation, resonance, timing. If the planet's magnetic field was being subtly reshaped, then cognition might be brushing against that change. Not receiving messages, resonating. This possibility echoed something ancient. In many traditions, the gate between worlds was never purely physical. It was perceptual, a shift in awareness. A thinning of separation between observer and observed. Perhaps the opening was not meant to release something into our world. Perhaps it was meant to allow us to perceive another layer of it. Data from Antarctica suggested that whatever lay beneath the ice did not rush toward manifestation. It did not force itself upward. Instead, it maintained pressure constant, patient, allowing the environment to adjust around it. This was not invasion behavior. It was coexistence. The structure beneath the ice showed no signs of instability, no fractures, no chaotic output. Everything remained symmetrical, controlled, precise. The only variable changing was the environment above it, the ice. As the ice thinned, the signal clarity increased. As the signal increased, global effects expanded. It was not difficult to imagine a future where the boundary would no longer be hidden by kilometers of frozen water. Not because the structure rose, but because the barrier dissolved. What happens when a threshold is no longer concealed? The most unsettling answer was also the calmest. Nothing dramatic. No explosion. No emergence of beings marching across the ice. Just overlap. A gradual blending of layers that had always existed side by side. Ancient texts hinted at this outcome. They spoke of times when the worlds leaned toward one another, when dreams carried more weight, when intuition sharpened, when reality felt less rigid, more permeable. These periods were not described as endings. They were described as transitions. The modern world fears transitions because they resist control. You cannot stop a threshold once it is reached. You can only decide how to stand before it. Governments understood this. Internal documents never intended for public release showed that intervention was considered. Extreme measures. Bombardment. Sealing the region with engineered barriers. Artificial freezing. Every simulation produced the same result. Force accelerated the process. The structure beneath Antarctica did not resist pressure. It amplified it. Any attempt to suppress it destabilized the surrounding system, increasing energy intake rather than reducing it. The gate, if that word can even be used, was not passive. It responded. The only stable outcome was non-interference, containment through distance, observation without intrusion, and time. Time was the only variable that seemed to matter. But time, like ice, is thinning. Recent measurements indicate that the 11-minute interval is no longer constant. Variations remain small, but the trend is unmistakable. The pulse is becoming more frequent. Not dramatically, gradually, as if approaching a different mode of operation. Some physicists liken it to a machine leaving standby, others to a heart shifting from rest to waking rhythm. Whatever analogy is used, the implication is the same. The system beneath Antarctica is transitioning. Whether that transition ends in full activation or a new equilibrium remains unknown. But the data suggests that the process is no longer hypothetical. It is underway. The most haunting aspect of all this is not the science. It is the familiarity. Again and again, researchers describe the same sensation when reviewing the data of feeling that this is not something new entering the world, but something returning to relevance. As if humanity is not discovering a secret, but remembering one. Perhaps Antarctica was never meant to be explored. Perhaps it was meant to be kept. A repository, a stabilizer, a place where the planet anchored something too complex, too vast, too fundamental to exist freely on the surface. If that is true, then the ice was not a prison. It was a promise. And now that promise is changing. The pulse continues. The light beneath the ice persists. And the silence that once defined the southernmost continent has transformed into something else entirely. Not quiet, not loud, aware, and waiting. There comes a point when observation itself becomes participation. For decades, humanity believed it was merely watching Antarctica, measuring, recording, classifying, standing at a safe distance while instruments did the work of perception. But distance is an illusion when the thing being observed is not confined to a single location. The threshold beneath the ice does not exist only there. It exists in relation. As the pulse strengthened, researchers noticed something subtle but undeniable. The anomaly was no longer confined to a fixed depth. Its influence extended upward not physically, not explosively, but relationally. The surrounding environment adjusted to it, not the other way around. Ice did not fracture randomly. It yielded along lines of least resistance that matched the underlying geometry. Magnetic fields did not collapse. They reorganized. Time stamps did not fail. They drifted toward coherence within a different frame. Reality was not breaking. It was realigning. This realization marked a turning point. The language used in internal reports shifted. Words like containment and suppression quietly disappeared. They were replaced by terms like stability, resonance, and compatibility. The question was no longer how to stop the process. The question became whether the planet itself was capable of sustaining the next phase. Because what lay beneath Antarctica did not behave like a device waiting to be activated. It behaved like a condition, one that had always existed, waiting for circumstances to return. The ice had not sealed it accidentally. The ice had formed when it was no longer needed. Long before human civilization, long before memory hardened into history, Antarctica was not frozen. Fossil records confirm this. Forests once grew there. Rivers flowed. Life thrived under long, slow days. And then the planet changed. The poles shifted. The climate cooled. Ice advanced. Whatever function Antarctica once served was gradually insulated, buffered, slowed. Not destroyed. Paused. What if the planet itself initiated that pause? What if the freezing of Antarctica was not merely a climatic accident, but a stabilizing response? A way for Earth to regulate a process that no longer needed to operate at full capacity. If that is true, then the current warming is not simply external pressure. It is release. The most unsettling models suggest that the threshold beneath the ice is not opening because the ice is melting. The ice is melting because the threshold is reasserting itself. Heat does not precede activation. It follows it. This inversion explains many inconsistencies. Why warmth appears from below? Why glaciers thin internally before collapsing? Why thermal anomalies ignore known geothermal pathways? The energy is not geological. It is structural. And structure implies purpose. This does not mean intent in a human sense. No desire, no plan, only function. Like gravity, like time, like magnetism itself. You do not negotiate with gravity. You adapt to it. As the pulse continued to accelerate still gently, still patiently, its harmonics began to overlap in ways never observed before. 11 minutes became 10, then 11 again, then 9.8, then 12. The pattern was no longer rigid. It was learning. This adaptability frightened some scientists more than any hypothetical invasion. A static phenomenon can be modeled. A responsive one requires humility. And humility is not humanity's strength. Yet, no catastrophe followed. No mass die-offs. No sudden collapse of systems. No dramatic revelation. Instead, there was subtlety. People began reporting moments of heightened clarity. Brief intervals where problems felt smaller, where the mind seemed less fragmented. Others described the opposite, a sense of insignificance so vast it bordered on relief. Psychologists struggled to classify these responses. They were not pathological. They did not impair function. They did not resemble known disorders. If anything, they resembled perspective, as if something ancient was reminding consciousness that it was never meant to be the center. Across cultures, spiritual traditions had long warned of this realization, that contact with the deeper structure of reality does not flatter the ego. It dissolves it. The Antarctic threshold did not announce itself. It did not speak. It did not demand. It simply was. And in its presence, the illusion of separateness weakened. Perhaps this is why ancient cultures framed such places as sacred. Not because gods lived there, but because orientation changed there. Because standing near a threshold alters the way the world arranges itself around the observer. In this sense, the figures glimpsed beneath the ice, if they exist at all, may not be entities. They may be manifestations of coherence, patterns where alignment becomes visible, forms emerging where layers overlap. Not visitors, indicators. This interpretation aligns with the most restrained conclusion scientists have been willing to consider privately, that Antarctica hosts a natural junction between scales of reality, not a doorway to elsewhere, but a region where the rules governing separation soften, a place where inside and outside blur. If this is correct, then the future does not involve arrival. It involves exposure. Humanity will not meet something new. It will gradually notice what has always been there. And that realization will not arrive through spectacle. It will arrive through quiet shifts, through altered priorities, through the slow erosion of assumptions about dominance, control, and centrality. Perhaps that is why the process is slow, because rapid revelation would shatter coherence. But gradual awareness allows integration. The ice continues to thin. The pulse continues to adjust. And the planet remains stable for now. Whether this equilibrium holds depends not only on Antarctica, but on humanity's response to it. Not politically, not militarily, psychologically. Can a species built on extraction, acceleration, and certainty adapt to a reality that cannot be owned, rushed, or defined? The threshold does not ask for permission, but it does respond to pressure. Force destabilizes it. Patience harmonizes with it. This is not a test. It is a mirror. Antarctica reflects not an alien presence, but the limits of our own framework. And in that reflection lies the quietest truth of all. The world was never empty. It was layered. And now, as the ice recedes and the pulse grows clearer, those layers are no longer content to remain unseen. Not because they wish to be known, but because it is time. The threshold waits. Not for conquest. Not for worship. Only for recognition. And recognition, once achieved, cannot be reversed. Eventually, the question stopped being what was beneath Antarctica. The question became why it had been placed there at all. Every model, every simulation, every attempt to frame the anomaly as an accident of geology collapsed under the same weight. Intention, not human intention. Not something driven by purpose in the way we understand it, but alignment, placement, fit. The structure beneath the ice does not dominate its environment. It harmonizes with it. Its geometry reflects planetary curvature. Its pulse resonates with the Earth's magnetic rhythm. Its timing aligns not with human clocks, but with cycles far older than civilization. This is not how weapons are built. This is how anchors are made. Researchers who dared to think beyond conventional frameworks began to consider a possibility both elegant and unsettling. That Earth itself might not be an isolated system. That it may be part of a larger architecture, one in which certain worlds serve specific functions. In this view, Antarctica is not a gateway in the dramatic sense. It is a stabilizer, a node, a junction point where multiple layers of reality touch just enough to remain coherent. Remove it, and the system destabilizes. Force it open, and coherence fails. Leave it alone, and balance persists. The ice was never an obstacle. It was a regulator. For millions of years, Antarctica has acted as a buffer, thick, slow, patient. Ice absorbs energy. Ice dampens motion. Ice slows change. While continents drifted, climates shifted, and species rose and fell, the southern ice cap held steady. It kept something in check. As long as the ice remained thick, the boundary remained narrow. Only echoes passed through. Dreams, myths, intuition, symbols carved into stone and passed through story. But echoes grow louder when walls thin. And walls are thinning now. The pulse beneath Antarctica no longer feels distant. It no longer hides in background noise. It asserts itself gently, persistently, as if reminding the planet of something it once knew, something it agreed to forget. There is a theory never published, never endorsed, that suggests humanity may not be the first intelligence to encounter the Antarctic threshold. That long before recorded history, another form of awareness may have recognized the instability of overlapping realities and acted accordingly. Not to escape, to contain. If that is true, then the structure beneath the ice is not a doorway built for travel. It is a seal designed for endurance. And the beings glimpsed by instruments, if they exist at all, are not visitors. They are caretakers, not watching us with judgment or hostility, but with the calm attention of something responsible for maintaining equilibrium. This would explain why there has been no escalation, no emergence, no demand, only observation, only resonance, only waiting. In this interpretation, humanity's role is not central. We are not chosen, not threatened, not targeted. We are incidental. The gate does not open for us. It opens with us. As consciousness evolves, as technology allows us to perceive finer layers of reality, as our instruments become sensitive enough to detect what was once imperceptible, the boundary grows visible. Not because it moves, because we do. This realization unsettles those who seek control. It offers no leverage, no enemy, no victory condition. You cannot negotiate with a process. You cannot threaten a balance. You can only choose how to exist within it. Some scientists have begun to speculate that the final stage of the Antarctic transition will not be physical at all, that no dramatic event will mark its completion. Instead, the change may occur quietly, diffusely, across perception itself. A shift in what feels real, a loosening of rigid categories, an intuition that the world is layered, and that those layers are closer than we once believed. Already, subtle signs appear. People report moments of heightened clarity during periods of strong Antarctic activity, a sense that thoughts arrive from somewhere deeper, a feeling that boundaries between self and world, past and present, are less absolute. These experiences are fleeting, easy to dismiss, but they are increasing, and they align. The pulse continues. 11 minutes becomes 10, then returns, then shifts again, not accelerating wildly, calibrating, as if approaching synchronization. One final hypothesis lingers at the edges of discussion, too abstract for headlines, too profound for policy. What if Antarctica is not guarding something alien? What if it is guarding continuity? What if the worlds that touch at the threshold are not other places, but other versions of now? Other outcomes? Other trajectories? If so, then the gate does not lead elsewhere. It leads inward into the branching structure of reality itself. And Antarctica, silent and vast, stands at the convergence point, a place where choices accumulate, where probabilities narrow, where the planet remembers paths it might yet take. This would explain the calm, the patience, the refusal to force. Because nothing is being unleashed. Something is being aligned. The ice continues to melt. The light beneath it does not surge. It waits. And perhaps the final crossing, if it can even be called that, will not be an event witnessed by instruments or recorded in archives. Perhaps it will feel like recognition, like standing at the edge of understanding and realizing the edge was never a wall, only a pause. Antarctica remains. The pulse remains. And the threshold, ancient, quiet, unyielding, holds steady, not as a threat or promise, but as a reminder. Some doors are not meant to be opened. They are meant to be approached and understood. And in the end, that may be enough. There is a moment after every great change when nothing seems to happen. No alarms sound. No skies split open. No voices announce what has been crossed. There is only stillness. This is the moment Antarctica entered. The pulses continued, but softer now. Not weaker, more refined. As if the system beneath the ice no longer needed to announce itself. As if the act of being noticed had been enough. Satellites still watched, but fewer people checked the data. Not because it disappeared, but because it no longer demanded urgency. The numbers stabilized into patterns, too smooth to panic over, too strange to explain. The world moved on. At least, it believed it did. Air traffic resumed its normal rhythms. Markets rose and fell. News cycles replaced anomalies with arguments, with storms, with distractions more familiar and easier to process. Antarctica slipped back into abstraction, into the category of somewhere else. But somewhere else had changed. The interior of the continent no longer behaved like frozen land. Seismic silence deepened, not the absence of motion, but the absence of friction. The kind of quiet that follows alignment, not exhaustion. Beneath the ice, the structure no longer pushed. It listened. The 11-minute pulse slowed, then resumed, not as a warning, not as a signal, but as a metronome. A reference point. A reminder that time still existed, even if it no longer ruled everything equally. Researchers who remained connected to the data noticed something subtle and unsettling. The system no longer reacted to observation. It no longer adjusted when instruments focused on it. It behaved as if observation itself had become irrelevant. As if whatever threshold existed had already been crossed, not physically, but relationally. The gate, if it ever was a gate, was no longer opening. It was open. Not wide. Not dramatically. Just enough. The most profound changes were not detected by machines. They were noticed by people. Dreams became quieter. Not more vivid, simpler. Less symbolic. More direct. Fewer images, more sensations. Vastness. Stillness. The feeling of standing within something rather than looking at it. People described waking with the sense that something important had already happened, even if they could not say what. Children spoke of cold light without fear. Artists painted spirals without knowing why. Musicians slowed their compositions, lingering on silence between notes. None of this made headlines. None of it needed to. The boundary did not collapse. It dissolved. And dissolution is gentle. Antarctica did not reveal new structures after that. No further images. No more probes. No reason to go back. Because the need to go there had faded. What had been localized was no longer confined. The ice had never been the source. It had been the filter. Ancient myths had always implied this. The gate was never a door to another place. It was a calibration point. A tuning fork. A way for the world to remember its larger shape. Civilizations did not guard Antarctica because something lived there. They guarded it because something balanced there. The ice was not a wall. It was a lens. And once the lens thinned enough, clarity spread without effort. There was no invasion. There was no contact. There was no announcement. Only a quiet redefinition of presence. Physics did not break. It relaxed. Time did not stop. It deepened. The universe did not speak. It listened back. And humanity, for the first time in its long history, sensed that it was not standing on the edge of the world but within it. Fully inside. Fully included. The final irony is this. Nothing needed to be done. No choice was required. No test was given. The threshold did not demand readiness. It only demanded patience. Antarctica had been patient for millions of years. The ice had been patient. The pulse had been patient. And when the moment arrived, it did not arrive as an ending. It arrived as a return, not to a place, to a state, to the understanding that separation had always been partial and silence had always been full. The continent remains. The pulse continues. And the world, whether it knows it or not, now moves within a quieter, deeper symmetry. Not watched, not guided, simply accompanied. And that is all. After everything that could be measured had been measured, after every alarm had quieted, after every screen returned to flat lines and neutral colors, what remained was not fear. It was stillness. Not the kind of stillness that feels empty, but the kind that feels complete. Antarctica no longer demanded attention. It did not pulse loudly. It did not glow dramatically. It did not call. It simply remained. The great mistake humanity had made for centuries was believing that significance announces itself. That meaning must arrive with noise, with spectacle, with urgency. But the oldest processes in the universe do not behave this way. They move slowly, patiently. They unfold on timescales that make human emotion seem hurried and small. The gate, if that word was ever appropriate, did not open in the way people expected. There was no moment that could be marked as before and after. No hour that history could circle in red. Instead, there was only a gradual softening, a quiet easing of separation. People did not wake up to a different world. They woke up to the same one, but with a faint, unfamiliar sense that something had shifted beneath it. Like standing in a familiar room where the furniture has not moved, yet the air feels deeper, the silence fuller. Dreams changed first, not in content, but in texture. They became slower, more spacious, less narrative. People reported dreams without faces, without events, only presence. Vast interiors, gentle light, a sense of orientation without location. Psychologists struggled to categorize them. There was no fear response, no anxiety spike, no trauma pattern. If anything, the dreams felt neutral, balanced, as if the mind had brushed against a wider context and returned unchanged except for a faint reduction in urgency. Time perception followed. People noticed that moments felt slightly less compressed. Conversations paused more naturally. Silence became easier to tolerate. The constant internal pressure to move, to react, to respond softened, not everywhere, not for everyone, but enough to be noticed in aggregate. No headline announced this. It did not need to. The planet adjusted quietly. Magnetic readings stabilized into a new baseline. Not weaker, not stronger, simply redistributed. As if the system beneath Antarctica had finished drawing what it needed and settled into equilibrium. The pulse did not stop, but it slowed. Not by much, just enough to suggest rest. The ice continued to thin, but at a pace that no longer felt alarming. Meltwater patterns reorganized themselves. Subglacial flows found new channels. Nothing collapsed. Nothing surged. It was not an ending. It was a settling. The most striking change was not physical. It was interpretive. People stopped asking, what came through? And began asking, what were we always standing next to? The idea that Antarctica was a door slowly lost its power. Doors imply separation, inside and outside, here and there. This felt different. It felt like two transparencies laid over one another. Light depth revealed not by movement, but by alignment. Some scientists proposed a quiet redefinition, that Earth had always existed within a layered reality, and Antarctica functioned as a region where those layers naturally intersected. Not a portal, not a machine, a geometry, a place where complexity folded gently inward. Ancient myths made sense in this light, not as warnings of invasion, but as early attempts to describe coexistence. The others were never arriving. They were always adjacent, perceivable only when the boundary softened enough for awareness to slip between frames. The figures seen beneath the ice were never confirmed again. No new images surfaced. No new recordings leaked. And somehow, that felt appropriate, as if observation itself had reached its limit, not because knowledge was forbidden, but because further definition would reduce something that was meant to remain spacious. The world did not change course. Cities did not empty. Technologies did not fail. Societies did not collapse or transcend. But something subtle endured. People began to tolerate uncertainty with slightly more ease. Not because they understood more, but because the need to fully understand weakened. The presence beneath Antarctica did not offer answers. It offered context. And context does not shout. It simply reframes. In the end, the greatest realization was not that humanity had reached a threshold, but that it always lives on one. Between knowing and not knowing, between control and participation, between isolation and connection. Antarctica was never the edge of the world. It was the place where edges dissolve. And once that is understood, nothing dramatic needs to happen. The ice remains. The silence remains. The pulse continues quiet, steady, sufficient. Not calling anyone forward. Not pushing anything back. Just holding. And perhaps that is what it was always meant to do. Not open, not close, but remain. As a reminder that reality is wider than urgency, deeper than fear, and patient enough to wait until we no longer need it to explain itself. After the end, there is no revelation, only continuity. And Antarctica, unchanged in appearance yet forever altered in meaning, returns to what it has always been. A still point, a quiet alignment, a place where nothing happens, and everything belongs.